Hello everyone, welcome back aboard the night train for the first modelling video in what feels like a little bit of a long time. Today we're finally going to be making a start on that underwater corner that I've been going on about for several months, which is going to be much more of a monumental task than the farmyard corner was. So as a quick overview, the underwater corner is going to be a section of baseboard which has been cut away to be dropped down to a lower level and also have a layer of Perspex to represent the surface water of a river or sea or whatever it ends up being. So there's going to be 2 levels, double the space to display figures and have other scenic elements on the layout as well. So that's going to be a really exciting way to showcase another one of the corners of the layout. Underneath the water layer is going to have aquatic wildlife and things suspended in the water column to add some depth/height to the scenery, while on the surface of the water there's going to be boats and other watercraft sat casting realistic shadows down through the water onto those things that can be found underneath. So it's going to create some really interesting angles and viewpoints and ways to film and take photos with the model layout as well. This does also mean that I am going to have to blend in what's going on below the water with what's going on above the water into some very seamless transition, which in itself presents a lot of other challenges to try and pull off, so it's going to be very interesting to see just how this turns out. With trains running past the scene, this is going to give some really interesting dynamic viewing for anyone seeing the layout here or potentially in person. So I'm actually really excited to actually have a crack at this and see just what I can pull off. So sit back and enjoy this first chunk of work I've managed to do on this corner of the layout, and spoiler warning, not everything ended up going to plan. With the corner already cut off the baseboard and an equal sized corner of hardboard screwed to the underside of the bracing, in terms of starting the scenery, the first step was to add a layer of mod rock to help strengthen the rigidity and to add some textured topography over the wood. I did 2 layers on the top cliff edge and also what will become the riverbed. For fitting the layer of Perspex that will form the surface layer of the water, I measured out a slot at the right height, length and depth to cut out of the bracing. I cut this out using various blades on my razor saw. Once cleared, I filed out the inside of the slot and then tested the fit with the cut to shape size Perspex sheet I'd ordered. With the Perspex in place, it was held in position using 3 slots through the bracing. To hold up the far corner, I glued in place a piece of 8mm diameter clear acrylic rod to keep the Perspex level. My plan of attack for building the river cliff was to use polystyrene up to the base of where the Perspex slot sits, and also to glue some underneath the baseboard down to where the top of the Perspex slot started. I laid down some glue ready for the polystyrene and positioned pieces of suitable height in place, and then left it to dry before I covered them in mod rock to improve the strength. Popping the Perspex back into place, I used slimmer pieces of polystyrene and glued them to the underside of the baseboard. With everything in place, I began applying mod rock to the base to help secure the polystyrene in place. With the Perspex in position, it was a tad more difficult than I anticipated. Unfortunately, the polystyrene did not stick down to the hardboard very well, proved too wobbly for the mod rock, so I decided to just rip it all off and start afresh. Not admitting defeat, I went with the age-old method of using chicken wire. Using a spare offcut from a garden clearance project, I used a staple gun to pin the chicken wire to the bracing and hardboard, just beneath the Perspex slots. For the cliff top above the water, I draped some longer pieces of mod rock over the edge and left it to harden at roughly the same height as the water level. After applying some mod rock over the chicken wire, I mixed up some cheap wall filler paste from B&Q and plastered this all over the mod rock to help seal it as a surface and to remove some of the holy textures. I made sure to use all the filler, bulking out any thinner sections. With the filler dried, I began painting a sandy base layer over the riverbed. To add a more rocky, striated texture and to give impression of the rock layers on the cliff, I raked the filler with a wire brush to carve out layers and roughen up the surface. For the riverbed, I laid down a layer of 50% diluted PVA glue. Atop this, I sprinkled a mixture of grey, brown and black ballast blended together with some sand particles to create a mixture of particle sizes and colour across the riverbed. Once this had dried, I set about painting the cliff face, starting with the watered down sandy acrylic paint. The first layer helped show up places I missed with the wire brush, which I could then rake. The painted flakes of filler settled at the bottom of the cliff and could be glued in place to represent action of erosion. While the cliff paint dried, I set about painting the soil layer above the water using watered down brown acrylic. Having re-raked and touched up the cliff texture to my liking several times, I began painting it again. First on was the base layer of sandstone, chosen to match the other geological features I'll eventually add to the layout. I watered down the paint as it was applied to help it run and give some patchy variation in the shading. Next, I added a more reddish layer of water acrylic, using Revel brown acrylic paint to give some ferrous touches, helping to give some popping contrast to the sand colour. After this, I applied a more greyish layer to juxtapose the warm colours. Atop the boards, and using the Perspex as a catch, I applied a layer of static grass along the cliff top as I did for the farmyard corner. 50% diluted PVA glue was laid down around some ballasting I did at an earlier point. With the static grass applicator grounded to the board, I sprinkled some shorter green fibres across the glue.
And that's pretty much everything I've managed to get done so far. That's pretty much the main form of the land, the base layer of scenery both below the waterline and above it, all prepared to go full out with the detailing and vegetation and getting those figures in that I've been talking about. I still think most daunting of all is trying to do that surface textured layer of water on the Perspex. I've not quite nailed down the final technique I want to use for producing that ripply water effect that you see in flowing rivers. So next time I think that's going to be my biggest challenge. I'll have to strike the right balance with trying to get it looking realistic, but also still being able to see everything going on underneath. So still watch this space. Mounting these suspended figures as well is also a little bit challenging. We'll have to see how that goes when I finally get around to doing it. That is going to be one of the final stages in putting life into this very enigmatic corner of the train layout. If you want to check back in with how everything goes, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, have that notification bell ticked for when the next video comes up in this 2-part series. Actually, a bit naive, the farmyard ended up being a 3-part series, but let's just call it the series on underwater layout corner. So if you want to check back in and see how everything goes in the next video and whether this crazy idea actually sinks or swims in practice,
please make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have that notification bell ticked so you know when the next video on this goes up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another video very shortly. Take care.